Trying to get me another cup of coffee before you said that.
That's the last thing I did before I came in too.
All right. Yep. Okay. Good to go.
Who is WSTV 13?
We're live streaming, so the city's channel. Mm-hmm.
So don't curse this time, Paula.
I'm glad I checked.
All right. Okay. We're ready whenever you are, sir.
Yep, we're good to go. Let's see. I'm sorry.
Here comes Ryan.
Agenda went. All right, cool. Just want us to go ahead and jump on in. So what we decided from the last meeting was, to begin to move forward with monthly meetings for the entire group. So just kind of maybe just catch up a little bit, Joe, with each one of the smaller groups not meeting in the same way, but having everybody come together so that we could try to move things a little quicker in terms of getting to some results and getting some things back out to the council and some action. And so this is, I guess, that first coming back together since we made that collective decision last month to move forward. So with that, we have first up on the agenda is the conversations on the long-term planning side, messaging, framing, development resources, and Wake Forest Baptist if we have updates on those areas.
Right. So we've been working on a glossary of terms relative to housing. And so I think there was a small kind of initial worksheet you guys were provided maybe early fall of last year or late summer. Since the conversation then and even last month, we've, with some help that I've gotten, we've been able to kind of pull together more terms, and we're kind of scrubbing the list now, but we went from a one-page document now to about 10 pages. And we decided to do a comprehensive dive into all kinds of terms, because sometimes when we might be talking about a particular project that we're aware of and what's the status of it, or have you heard if this has happened to it, this, that, and the other. Sometimes, something may be said about, well, it had this kind of financing or it was this kind of project. So we figured we would err on the side of giving you more information in terms of terminology than not. So like I said, we're scrubbing the document now. I would expect that we would definitely have it in final form for you next month. Of course, it can be a living document. So as new programs are created and terms come about, we can always add to it. So do look for the working final, I'll call it a working final copy next month. As far as development resources, and Tom, we kind of straddle two areas with the development resources and the employer-assisted housing on the access and services. I copied Tom on an email I sent to Gary Gunderson with Wake Forest Baptist Health. If some of you may recall, Tom facilitated an introduction to both Wake Forest as well as Novant for a conversation around employer-assisted housing. In the midst of one of our conversations, however, Wake Forest Baptist mentioned that they also had some resources that they were looking to invest in housing in general, in the creation of affordable housing. So that's why I actually have the note here under development resources, because I actually reached out to Gary Gunderson with Wake Forest with a series of questions to understand more about their investment objectives. So that we could understand what kind of resources they might be looking to bring to the table as we continue conversations perhaps with Truist and anyone else for some resources that can help us get some projects going. So this was just primarily an update. I recognize and acknowledge this in the email to Gary Gunderson, that I'm sure they're very, very busy with vaccine distribution and logistics and all of that, but did mention to him that I was hopeful that we might be able to schedule something maybe in 30 days or what have you. So my hope is that there will be a breather for him where he could entertain a conversation with us, sometime in the next 30 days. But just to let you know that we've continued the outreach, at least in this particular vein, in terms of some development resources. And I'll pause there to see if there are any questions maybe I can answer on this particular area.
Marla, I have a question about the housing that's going up at Whitaker Park. Mm-hmm. I guess that's not employee assisted housing. That's just workforce housing.
Correct.
That's right. And who is the developer there? I mean, is that private?
Yes, the same gentleman who did, I'm going to call them the lofts wrong, downtown. His name is Chris Harrison.
Plan 64 was
64. Yeah, Plan 64.
He's a Black developer, right? Is that
correct?
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's who's doing Whitaker Park.
Marla, can I ask a question about the Wake Forest? And I know I'm behind, and this will just be quick. What's the makeup or the structure of Wake Forest Baptist Health employer assisted housing? What are they looking to do? Housing just for their employees, or do you know any? Or is this not a good time to get into what their program looks like?
No, this is a good time. We haven't actually framed the program. So what we did, thanks again to Tom, was go to them and let them know that the city had set aside monies to do a pilot program for employer-assisted housing. Okay. And we were approaching them to see if they had an interest in taking on that kind of work.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so we're in the very early stages. And at the last conversation, we had Novant at that time, which was probably September or October, said that they were maybe about 6 months or so out from being ready to look at this in earnest. Whereas with Wake Forest, they were interested in continuing the conversation, and then, also mentioned other resources they would like to invest in affordable housing in general. So Wake Forest is looking at both employer-assisted housing as well as investments in affordable housing.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
Right.
Marla, has a site been determined for that, or is that still in the conceptual?
Well, with the employer assisted, that's just where the funds are provided for down payment and closing cost assistance, and the employee chooses their home wherever. So that's what that.
Okay. It's not a place. It's wherever.
No. Okay. Now, one of the things that we're when I say we're, I'm talking on the staff side, are looking at is, and putting together what the program or the model could be. Could there be a situation where, let's just say, there's a certain amount of investment or assistance provided if you choose anywhere in the city. But then maybe if you choose in a targeted development area, maybe the amount of assistance gets bumped up, right? And so we're going to look at, what are some models that might make the most sense, because there may be some places where we want to give a greater incentive to come and purchase, right? And so those are some of the kind of finite areas that I've been working on to then go back when we have more in-depth conversations about what a program could possibly look like. We would have some examples of different structures. If the city invests this, then they invest that. If somebody is under 80% of area median income, or what if someone is over 80%? Because we talk about the missing middle in a lot of ways, missing middle in homes in terms of structures, but then also how do we support those folks who are kind of in the middle, who might still be a little housing cost burden. They're maybe not struggling as much as folks who are under 80%, but finding good quality housing where they want might still be a big lift, right? So, you know, looking at how do you just assist folks in becoming homeowners. So it might be supporting both above and below 80%. So giving them some options, you know, to invest in. And because these are bond dollars, we have a little bit more flexibility like that. Now, if they're under 80%, then we can use the federal funds. But if they're over 80, we can use the bond dollars. Other questions I can answer under long-term planning? Okay. So I think, did you want to move to the next item under housing stock?
Yep.
Oh,
well,
Paula?
Just a real quick question about that. You said that the city has set aside some funds for a pilot for employer-assisted housing. What does that mean?
So in the 2018 bonds that were passed, there's a line item for $250,000 for a pilot project for employer-assisted housing.
And it's probably
okay. And then the employer matches that, or?
Yeah, that's, yeah, they put in an amount, we put in an amount, right.
Thank you.
I was just gonna say, I know that, I guess when that was going to the council, I know Marla brought that information around. It's been, I was just saying, it's been some time, but I remember that Marla brought it around to us then too.
Okay. Thank you.
Housing stock.
So on this one, I would like to defer to Paula on the housing stock, and I weigh in. I mean, like, I understand that the survey, because I think last month there was still an amount of surveying that needed to be done that I understand is basically done now, maybe with the exception of 4 houses or something.
Yeah, that housing condition assessment is in essence completed. We were charged with doing 1,187 single houses and 157 multifamily units. And so almost all of those were completed in a targeted area, mostly in East Winston and some in Northeast Winston. And so that, you know, it went well in terms of the surveying, so to speak. The weather, of course, was a hindrance at sometimes. But I think the thing that we really wanted was to try to get the community more engaged. And we didn't really accomplish that the way that we wanted to. We wanted a housing task force to come from the community that would help in suggesting ideas about how to do some of the rehab, but we didn't quite accomplish that. And so I think we still want to try to accomplish that to get more community engagement. So that's a task still before us.
And I'll be meeting with the planning department this afternoon at 1 to actually talk about the data that we were able to obtain and look at any key trends that we might be able to see based on the data, and figure out, you know, how we can prepare some kind of report, you know, be it a dashboard or something that we can bring back to you to let you know what the initial findings are. And just as a reminder, these were exterior conditions that were being assessed using a mobile app that we procured.
And that reminds me of the internal survey that we wanted to do as well. We were trying to get a neighborhood association or community group to do that. So we were in conversation with a group, but it just didn't happen. And again, the weather may have been a impediment there. But I think that we still want to do that survey that gives us an idea of what the internal conditions might be of those houses.
Yeah. And that's probably something we'll just maybe need to talk with NBN about or whomever, especially now that, we're getting ready to come out of winter. Even if we were hoping that the surveying exterior or interior would be an opportunity for, like I said, more community or neighborhood engagement, maybe even if we can still get some volunteers to at least still do the interior assessments, which is just a questionnaire that we ask people to complete. And the questionnaire we've already set it up so that it can be done online, as well as we can give out a physical copy. So our marketing department is just waiting for us to give them the green light to put it online and go live with it. So it's just a matter of being able to make sure that those who aren't able to access the online application, could still have an opportunity to respond. And that gives us more of an opportunity to go beyond just the anecdotal evidence of the condition of our housing stock. For this department, because we do the rehab lending, we have a sense of the amount of deferred maintenance and other issues that homes have, but being able to have some more hardcore data, I think would be helpful, especially as we go down the path and we talk about long-term planning and resources. If for example, we wanted to support asking the council to do another bond referendum, then one of the questions becomes, well, how much and for, to do what work? And I think having some good data can help support a particular ask in terms of dollar amounts that we might, want to promote, be a part of the bond package if they are to do one. There's talk of possibly doing one. So I think it would kind of behoove us to be able to help inform that decision, if at all possible, by providing some good data.
Marla, will that report that you're talking to planning about on this, will that include some mapping so we can see patterns and things like that? Mm-hmm.
And that's some of what, Kaylin and Aaron and I'll be meeting at 1 o'clock to talk about what data we want to really highlight, and then how do we map it and put it in a format that, makes it readily digestible. Mm-hmm. And two, just as another reminder, this was an outgrowth of the For Everyone Home initiative, where we were looking at neighborhoods that might be at particular risk of displacement and gentrification. So that's where this project kind of grew out of. And this will also inform some of the policy recommendations that are being formulated right now with For Everyone Home. And so there could be some, again, policies that may grow out of this that might end up coming to council as well, based on all of the research that's taken place to date.
Yeah. A question, actually, a point I wanted to make about later in this discussion, maybe something that come out of the presentation with Housing NOLA and even discussion around next step kind of things. But under housing stock, one of the things that I had written down was just in the sense of a question around how we keep up or maintain any sense of our actual housing loss from an affordable housing standpoint. So we think about those particularly looking at the multifamily side of it more than the single family side in terms of the units that we have been losing over the years, and how if there's any place that any of that is kind of tracked or kept up or with any place, and if not, is there a place how we think about where that lives to help influence kind of the numbers and the thoughts. And when I'm thinking about that, think about was it the apartments just started demolition.
Cloverdale?
Yeah, Cloverdale, just started the demolition there, and kind of where those price points were, and then other spaces in the community where we've seen some unit loss, and not just recently, but even when we think about some of our Hope 6 projects, and the fact that in some of those areas we didn't go back to the same number of units that were in the community before, and so really when we think about the opportunities we have to move forward. Just wondering, how we keep up with the losses as well as what we're looking to do from a creation standpoint.
So certainly this department does not, while we will track some on the single family side because of demolitions. For a variety of reasons, we don't. One of the larger ones, even though we do code enforcement in multifamily is really more considered commercial. And so we do the non-commercial stuff in this department. I would imagine that there could be a way, maybe through some kind of analysis of tax records to show what's lost. But I also would think, when I think about loss of units, I also think about the loss in terms of properties transitioning from affordable to market, because that's another loss, right? And so short answer is we don't track. I'm not quite sure how we could. That'd be interesting. See, that's a situation like that is I'd love to have like an AmeriCorps worker or somebody who could like dig in and do some of the research. But some kind of, staff somebody that could maybe dig into that as a project. But yeah, there are losses both in terms of physical structures as well as affordable units. So I appreciate you raising that point because that is a good thing to know if we can figure it out.
Yeah, and I kind of knew the answer to it, that in terms of just not necessarily you all having that there, just in something for us to throw out, because I think as we move forward in just the conversations, one of the things I think, particularly for us in our market, that, I think there is but there's very clear more market rate units being created than there are the affordable units, and at a faster pace. And on both sides of it, what you just mentioned in terms of affordable units that are transitioning to non-affordable units at a higher pace. And so I think all that impacts even some of the numbers and some of the goals that we may have, because I think that that number is likely increasing on the need on the lower income quicker than we're able to even get some of the things moving. So that was just kind of footnote to think about as we move forward around the housing stock thing. So yeah.
And Sharon just put in the chat box that one way, at least from a physical loss, is to go to the permit department and look for demo permits.
Yep.
Yeah, so that would be one way. Thank you, Sharon, for sharing that.
Cool.
Okay. That's the housing conditions survey. And I guess from a practical perspective, I kind of touched on the employer assisted housing pilot. I don't know if there's any more that Tom would want to add. I know he and I haven't had a chance to connect lately, but I don't know if there's anything else, Tom, we need to share.
No, I'm probably going to need to go back to the drawing boards because I think, as you stated, and you did a wonderful job in outlining some conceptual ideas to Gary. So I want to make sure you get credit for pushing that forward on the investment side. But I really think they're going to now focus more on that. Which is good. And actually, I want to kind of help on that too. But it means that from the employee assisted housing, I'm going to need to find some other targets. So I'll get to work on that.
Okay, great. And just, of course, as always, just let me know what I can provide that helps with that. Especially, we have that tool now with paycheck to paycheck, which is a huge help. Yep. Yeah. And maybe one day we'll walk you through that tool, the rest of you through that tool. It's on the website with the National Housing Conference. And it's where you can put in your metropolitan area, and then you can select up to like 10 occupations, I think, at one time. And it will tell you how much income you need to earn for a 1 or 2, maybe even 3-bedroom rental unit. And so it shows what different occupations make and then what they need to earn in order to afford those units. And then they also have an equivalent on the home ownership side, and it notes, and in both instances, what the fair market rent is and what the average or fair housing cost purchase prices are. And again, how much you would need to earn in order to purchase versus how much you do earn. So it's very easy to, at a glance, see what gaps might exist in certain occupations, which is why, the thought came about, to earmark some of the bond money for employer-assisted housing, because we could see there was a big gap, and where we knew that home ownership is a priority of the city council, we knew that a lot of folks were going to need some extra help in order to get there. And so that paycheck to paycheck is a really, really great tool.
Quick question on that, or just a thought. Has any conversation been had with some of the folks, or just a thought around employers that potentially could do, financial investment, but also those who are larger landowners, and so how their own property could play a role in the creation of employer assistance? And I'm just thinking of, if you have an institution that, has, larger property that within their own strategic planning, they don't have a long-term use for, potentially, opportunities where not having the land costs to begin to be able to help bring costs down as a way, and a thought, with some institutions out there. Has that been any part of that part of the conversation?
Actually, there's another target I have, which I'll just keep to myself for now, but it fits exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
Okay. So I think the next thing is housing NOLA. If you're ready to go into that part of the agenda. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope I can do this successfully. Let's see, there we go. And hopefully, can you all see the screen here?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good. So, I've mentioned a few times, and this kind of is a segue into the what is the X we're solving for, where we know just at base level that we have a need of over 14,000 units of affordable housing. And we obviously did the housing study and needs assessment, which revealed that. We've also done an assessment of vacant and abandoned and deteriorated properties, so we can understand what those are, where they are, what the impact it is to the tax coffers, and a whole host of information there. We're wrapping up our work with For Everyone Home. So it's almost like we have a treasure trove of information and data. But what we're lacking, and we've talked about this, is now how do we get to fixing the issue, right? And so we've had some conversations about, the usefulness of an actual housing plan and a strategy that folks can own parts of and implement to actually start to address that shortfall. And so I'd also mentioned about my experience having been a part of, in a small way, the creation of the 10-year plan for housing in New Orleans. And this was a very community-involved process a few years after Hurricane Katrina, because New Orleans found itself grappling with what to do about the significant loss of housing that they encountered. So I thought it might be helpful today just to kind of look at a few elements of the website. They stood up an organization ultimately to kind of help shepherd implementation of the plan. Let me see if I can move this over so I'm looking more at you all than from screen to screen. There we go. So I thought it might be helpful just to kind of give you an opportunity to see some elements of it. on the web page itself. They have some neat little tiles about, where you can find all of the documents. So it's a really, really intuitive site. So any documents relative to the plan, you can find some stuff there. The community engagement part tells you here maps and statistics on particular neighborhoods. We'll come to the plan in just a moment. And then they even did a neighborhood typology study, about the different housing styles, which is a big thing in Louisiana because they have some very unique architecture. There have been some other efforts right after Katrina where they kind of did a compilation of different housing types and styles so that whatever went back into neighborhoods would be consistent with the existing architecture, so you wouldn't have some of those clashes. But they have a public meeting calendar. And then there's the overarching 10-year plan, and then there are elements of the plan that have their own implementation strategies.
Hey, Marla, before I see something I probably shouldn't see, what am I supposed to be looking at right now? Because I see your desktop.
I think we're looking at your home screen.
Oh, I moved it off of the, Thank you for saying that. See, I tried to move it so I could see you guys while also looking at the screen. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I was trying to make it so I'm over here on one screen and the camera's over there. I apologize. So I was actually walking you through the different tiles that talk about the different elements of information they have. Tom, thank you so much for that. So just easy ways to go into certain areas if you want to see them. So this kind of gives you the background on it. And actually there's a piece in here, I'll show you in a moment. I actually wrote a part in a newspaper about the process that they were undertaking. Because at that time I was the executive director of the Louisiana Housing Alliance. And so I partnered with the organization that kind of started to spearhead all of this. So I had a little piece that I wrote on behalf of our organization. So one of the things I'll do is just kind of go back to the about section. So it tells you about, how it got started, who some of the folks were at the table. Kind of here where my cursor is, you see the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. So they were a peer and partner organization with the statewide coalition that I worked with, but they focused on the New Orleans area. And so it just talked about how the community came together to look at how to address that huge housing loss that they suffered after the storms. So, so that's just one piece of it where they kind of give you the background. I don't want to walk through, all of the ins and outs, but I wanted you to kind of just get a sense of the flow here. Although they talked about over 275,000 homes, that they had to address. So clearly they needed a plan, right? One of the things that I know I've talked a lot about with you all is the community engagement piece, because that was critical. There were times when different folks came to the table with different plans and strategies. They didn't have the community at the table, and somebody would go to city council and it would just blow up in a very, very unfortunate way. And so after 2 or 3 times of different folks coming up with their own plans and having the community stand up about that, they decided they needed a different approach, which was really making sure they had the community involved. This is Andrenika Morris. She is the point person for Housing NOLA, and she was also the president of the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. So she is one at any time, if we would like to hear from somebody who really played an instrumental role in how to pull these things together, what were some of the impediments to pulling folks together from the community to business or what have you, I know she would be more than happy to participate with us via Zoom. It's nothing for me to make that request to her. So what we have here is, let's see, I'll scroll down some. So they have, one of the things I wanted to show you on the community engagement piece, let's see here. Maybe I need to go down a little further on the page, because there was a piece that talked about who's involved. So they created an operational structure. Okay, so you have the community review team. And again, you know, there are different folks on here I know that I'd be happy to connect folks with to just learn more information. But you can tell that it's not just a small little group of people. I mean, they really wanted to get a variety of inputs from the community. They have an advisory board. And then here you'll see this long list of partners and organizations, okay? You know, they had the council involved. They had a number of community nonprofits. You see Capital One Bank. I mean, you just had a ton of engagement. And it was this engagement, I think, that really helped set the stage for the success that they ultimately achieved in creating the plan. But you had enterprise community partners, Foundation for Louisiana. So you had the nonprofit sector, philanthropic sector, the private sector, the public sector, neighborhood associations, and a variety of folks. NeighborWorks America. I mean, they had a ton of engagement.
Hey, Marla. Quick question on this. This plan, what role did developers, whether they were multifamily developers or single family developers, play in agreeing, well, either agreeing or accepting the plan and then abiding by the components of the plan that will provide the kind of housing the plan was designed to provide?
So right here, you see my cursor, Louisiana Association of Affordable Housing Providers.
Right, oh yeah.
They're the for-profit developers. So they were at the table.
Okay.
So when I say robust engagement, the Louisiana Office of Community Development Disaster Recovery Unit. So you even had the state at the table, right?
Okay.
The Louisiana Association of Affordable Housing Providers, or LAP is what we call them, very powerful. They tended to be your tax credit developers.
Right.
So they had they have a strong lobbying arm, but they've always been good partners and players in that part of the state.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Marla. I'm sorry. I also just wanted to say I think this is a outstanding way to move forward into the future. And I know I've asked the question before, and I know we have later on in the agenda goals for the next year, but I would definitely like to be involved as far as a lot more with the community, getting them involved and maybe trying to set up some type of task force just so we can start hearing from our families, our community members, because I know we're still trying to figure out where to build, how to build, but I think it's important that during the same time, we also try and start meeting with families sooner than later, because I'm sure they may have some concerns or maybe even some ideas. So if we start listening to them, I know we still have COVID restrictions, but I would love to just try and talk more around meeting more with our families so that we can try and hear from them now.
Sure, sounds good. And one of the things that I'm wondering might be helpful is if, let's just say I was able to get Ms. Morris, Andronika Morris, to visit with us at our next meeting. You know, where do you start? You know, how did they get started? What do you need to get started? You know, and I'll tell you, you know, this was a process from initial meeting to planned finality, if you will. It took just over 12 months. but it was a lot. But you can see with all of these people involved, right? And I mean, they had tons and tons of meetings. Tulane University was at the table. I mean, you had everybody. I think that might be a helpful something is to hear how they did it, you know, because they could save us a lot of steps and heartaches, right? If we could hear from somebody who pulled it off, and maybe our timeline doesn't have to be quite as extensive. I mean, New Orleans is a much larger city, it has a different kind of dynamic. So maybe ours doesn't have to take that long, but you know, at least to understand why it took as long as it did and what all was involved, I think would be helpful.
Marla, will you be sharing this presentation with us in the G Drive or whatever we're using now?
Actually, I'm just on their website.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but what we can do is make sure to just put the main web address in the minutes so that you'll have it handy. But yeah, I'm just here on their website, housingnola.org, and just flipping through. And so you'll see here we have plans. Every year they do an annual report card. Okay. They've done a state of housing report. They did a preliminary report, which was just before they completed the final document that they shared. I'll just hit the main report for right now, just for some of the topical areas, and then we'll come out of the screen sharing, because I just kind of wanted to do just a quick walkthrough of their site. They talk about, again, neighborhood typologies, policy for the next decade, the process that they employed, obviously the state of housing, which we know thanks to our study with Enterprise, you know, and then they actually walk through what their policy priorities are, right? And talk about improving the quality of life in neighborhoods, and then the implementation plan. And you'll see one main part of it was capacity building. And then they had an implementation matrix and timeline, and then the template for the annual report. You know, so going in, you know, they knew that they were going to need to report out on a regular basis for accountability and transparency purposes. In all transparency, having said that, the glossary, I just used a part of their glossary to build the glossary that we have. You know, no sense in us having to go and dig it up from 50 million places. I knew there was a glossary, just grabbed it, said, let's scrub it and update it and modify certain things that are relevant to North Carolina. But it's a very, very detailed document. And even though this says page 111, I mean, physical pages is 61 pages of information, okay? So unless somebody wants me to drop to a particular piece of the actual plan, you know, I'll come out of this here in just a second, but I did at least kind of want you to see what the overarching document looks like. And I think there's one other part I wanted to show you with the individual plans. Let's see here. So here you see a 2018 Community Development Finance Plan. So they actually even came up with an actual plan to look at how do you finance the stuff, right? And that was a couple of years after the final plan was released. So, you know, you get into doing the work, and after a while, step back and go, okay, what are some special elements we need to look at? So before I stop sharing the screen, is there anything else you'd like to know or see?
Marla, before I have to go and before you do that, I'm curious as to whether New Orleans hired or used a housing consultant or a marketing consultant to put the plan together. One, not the individual pieces, but to be able to show this kind of presentation. Was there someone other than city staff that was involved in the preparation of this plan, so it could be shared even internally with city or externally with citizens or other states?
Yes, there was. And the Foundation for Louisiana which grew out of Hurricane Katrina. They were at the table first, them as well as the Greater New Orleans Foundation, and they provided seed money to help cover the cost of getting some facilitation and consulting support for this. And they did a lot of fundraising to actually produce the document and all of that.
Okay, because these things don't just happen with internal staff kind of thing, particularly not this way, not to short you or anybody at the city kind of thing, but usually it takes some outside money to help put this kind of thing together and do it the way it can be done in order to raise money or to get other stakeholders or people participating in it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I appreciate you lifting that up. Absolutely, yeah. This was a big lift, and you've got to have some third party whose focus is this, and to to the exclusion of other maybe daily tasks and responsibilities. So,
Marla, something I noticed, and it sounds like it's maybe relevant to the point George made in terms of engagement and outreach and all that, is it looked like each of those tiles, each of those sections there had a video attached that kind of introduced people to what that was about and how it was, how it was being comprised. So I think for a process like this, not every single person's going to get involved at exactly the same time. So since people are going to be plugging in at different points in the process, I think having a very robust website that has information, but also has video to it that will help people kind of quickly understand what's going on, I think that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. 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 Other questions before I leave the website? All right. Let's see, I see something in the chat box. Oh, okay. Okay. So then I guess this could maybe be a segue, Derwin, you think, into what is the X we're solving for, or do we kind of have a sense of what that is, or, I'll now kind of step back and let you guide us on where we need to go next on the agenda.
Yeah, I think that it is a good segue, and then even into the whole goals conversation for us for 2021. One of the things that I did before this meeting was just to review and go back and just kind of look at the housing study that was completed beforehand, and really looking at the objectives and the goals that were set out in that, and how we're working, and then what else is taking place already in community, whether it's the work that's going on around the housing needs assessment itself, some of the work that each one of the committees had been doing work on, whether it was the employer assistant housing. But one thing I think is helpful for us in terms of we get into the goals for 2021 is to maybe take a little time to kind of refresh our minds around some of those recommendations that came out of the housing study, because I think it hits on the cores of all the things that we've been talking about and really frames it well for us to kind of then put the additional meat and potatoes around it that we may need for the goals for 2021. Because there were 5 core things that came, recommendations, and then there were objectives and strategies around some of the things to do that in the housing study. The first was increase housing supply to help close current gap. 2, improve maintenance, quality, and overall preservation of housing. 3, create a better balance between housing units produced and actual size of households. 4, prevent displacement of low and moderate income residents. And 5, increase access to opportunities that are tied to where residents live. And so we look at those 5 kind of objectives that were there, and we look at where we are and look at the work. There's things moving in each one of those areas, somehow, some conversation, something that's going on, but it's not, I guess, not as tied to those kind of recommendations. It's just wondering, at least for me, since that was kind of one of the initial kind of guiding blocks or kind of impetus to these conversations and dialogues, how do we make sure we leverage that information well into the goals that we have? Because again, in each one of those 5 categories, there's some, recommendations on some things that can be done, some things that we might want to look at. And I think it's well to assess whether or not those recommendations still make sense for us right now. And then with the work that has already been done, what additional do we may want to add to those areas, or if there's something that's missing in that, because again, it gives us that good foundation for us to look at it. And then I think for the 2021 goals, how much of that do we feel like we can reasonably accomplish within the remainder of the year? And at the end of the day, I do believe that any of that recommendation, any of that work ties back into that presentation we just had from around housing NOLA, because throughout this entire conversation, we talked about, we have the recommendations, have those things, but this is going to have to live somewhere from an accountability standpoint. But what exactly is it that we're trying to help shepherd or pass over to some other group? So that was kind of my thought on how we could frame and move forward for some of the goals, components, and even I think we did get a better sense of kind of that solvent X. But I kind of paused there to see if folks had a different perspective or thought on how we would chart forward for kind of setting those next.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a thought, so I don't want to be. I'm getting ready to exit, and I thought this would be a good time for me to exit. But say to you and to Marla that I look forward to catching up, since it seems like obviously I've been behind for quite some time. So I'll try to make an effort, Marla, to get with you or something to kind of get up to speed more, particularly on this piece you all are getting me to do now. But I do have to jump off for my 11 o'clock meeting, so. I apologize, Mr. Chair, but another previous commitment.
Understand.
Thanks again. Thanks for having my communication stuff together now, Marla. We should be okay going forward.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Right, take care, guys. Talk to everybody later.
Good to see you, Joe.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Tom. See you, Paula.
Bye. Okay. All right.
Others have thoughts on kind of the charting the course forward and the goal settings for us for this year?
Darren, there are a lot of groups who are working on housing. We have quite a few silos, and I certainly am one of the organizations that work to try to eliminate some of the silos. But advocacy seems to be something that I keep hearing really bubble up in terms of that we need to do more advocacy work, particularly around housing, so that we can help influence, I guess, the city council as it relates to their efforts toward housing and housing in some of these areas. So, I guess I'm just simply saying that advocacy certainly needs to be a part of that. And I think something Marla said earlier is this collaboration, just really bringing people to the table who are working on this. I know at P4P, Partnership for Prosperity, we are looking at those 56 recommendations that came out of the Mayor's Poverty Thought Force and around those 5 social determinants of health, but certainly housing being one of those, just to see where in those recommendations, where we are now, what has happened, who's working on what, who's doing what, and then where are the gaps still. And some of them are similar to what you've outlined in terms of your goals, with the city, but certainly there are some other ones too. So I'm just wondering how we can make sure that all of that data is collected, and so that we're looking at, the whole picture.
I had an idea. I know around the Choice Neighborhoods grant that is active now and trying to get started. All of the different nonprofits, excuse me, all of the different nonprofits got together and sat down with the Housing Authority on numerous occasions. They also met with other stakeholders as well as the community members. Maybe we might want to try and work on something in the new strategic plan to try and make that happen quarterly. Because if we can collaborate with more partners, maybe we can get out of our silos and work together to come up with what people are doing. Because Paula, as you said, you probably have information. United Way has information. Habitat has information. The city has information. But if we continue to work in those silos, how do you share that information? So if we can continue to try and, well, maybe set up a plan to meet quarterly, just to at least sit down by Zoom or in a large gymnasium or something and try and share that information. At least we can get together and find out what we all have and then come up with the best possible plan going forward. But again, that's just a thought.
Others? Thoughts on how we
it sounds to me like one of the thoughts I have is we've all acknowledged this is a massive, complicated, dispersed issue that we're trying to wrap our arms around. And, for 2021, obviously 2021 is not, the goal is not to solve it. The goal is to take the first steps we can to get down the road to solving it. Just in the last couple of minutes of this conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there is no real clearinghouse of information of who's doing what to address housing in the city, county, the programs that are already in place, where money's coming from, where it's being spent, private dollars, public dollars. So maybe one attainable goal for the year would be to become that clearinghouse of information about who's doing what out there. So if somebody were to come to the city and say, I need to find out what's going on with affordable housing, that we would be, or something affiliated with us would be, whether it's a website, whether it's a resource, I don't know what it would be, but we would be the clearinghouse for everything affordable housing.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that, John. Maybe, first and foremost, being that clearinghouse of information would be a good way to kind of establish some credibility and the ability then to draw people together into the conversation. Derwin, I was looking over those 5 areas that you had mentioned that the housing study did, and I think those 5 areas kind of are they're a good broad umbrella that covers everything. But I kind of found myself kind of focusing in on there's a lot of subcomponents to supply and maintenance of supply. It's like I started thinking, partnerships is an important part of creating supply. So how do we create good public-private partnerships, partnerships with neighborhoods, partnerships with financing resources, partnerships with people, as you mentioned earlier, Derwin, about, or I forget who it was, who people who have access to land. I think it was Derwin who mentioned that. How we get a handle on the housing needs in terms of owner and rental housing, what type of housing, how much, single family, multifamily, group housing, how does it break down in terms of household income, so as I look at those, they certainly fit under those umbrella categories there, but there's just a whole lot to delve into and to try to develop plans and strategies about, when we're looking at each of those.
Yeah. And I agree, and that's what I wonder for us. Maybe is there a conversation around one? Do we use these? Do we use those 5 kind of objective recommendations as kind of a baseline, or do we use something different? And then even the actual recommendations underneath of each one of them that came out of this study. But to the point, I think that both George and Paula were talking through around some of the advocacy and community engagement components. Somewhat hard to advocate, I think, from my perspective, if we don't have a good sense of what it is that we're advocating. We know we say we want affordable housing, but that means different things to different people. So the more specificity we can get to on what it is we're actually advocating for helps with those folks who are at the table and being the decision makers. And so in hearing this conversation, I wonder if part of the move forward, and you all tell me if it sounds reasonable or not, is if we get some consensus on these areas of these 5 objectives that have been recommended for us to work on, do we do that part of, okay, who's working in each one of these areas already? Who do we know that's doing the work in this space, even in some of those larger umbrella areas that may go a little bit, some questions that we want to ask, who's in this space, who's talking about it, who's working in this space. And maybe that's part of the start of what may help facilitate those conversations around what we saw in that presentation, even around the housing NOLA stuff, that it took beginning to have some of those conversations with those folks to kind of facilitate that longer term kind of work that created what needed to come. But at least at that point, we started to get a better perspective of what's happening, what's going on, pulling folks out of the silos into more of a collective conversation, kind of starting to be part of that resource of letting folks know you can go here for this resource or this group is working on that. But it gives us some level of baseline to begin to move through some of our work moving forward. But I think it starts on whether or not we think those are still remain reasonable objectives for us to use to ask the questions of who's doing the work in each one of those spaces.
That was really great, Darren, the way that you worded that. Now, I think that this is a huge elephant that we have. And, do we try to eat the whole elephant, at one time, or do we just, take it bite by bite? And, because we know what the issues are, I think, in this community. And we know as it relates to housing in the city, we're so segregated. In order to build this more diverse and inclusive economy, we need to have housing, mixed income housing throughout the city, and not all the poor people in East Winston, or, on this side of Highway 52. So for instance, if we focus on building a more diverse and inclusive economy, we can tackle NIMBYism maybe and educate people about why we need more mixed income housing. I don't want to ramble, but education becomes such an important piece here as well. Just helping people understand why it is important for this city to have a more diverse and inclusive economy. So, can we work on the people with the NIMBYism? Can we do the education piece? Which comes first? In other words, it's like the chicken and egg story. But anyway, those are just some thoughts that I was having.
So Derwin, I think you've articulated it really well. I think the housing study did a great job of identifying what our problem is and the scope, what the challenge is, what the scope of the challenge is. I think those 5 areas are still totally relevant. And I think where I was coming from with my comment was, so we know what the challenge is, but we don't know what proposed what solutions are already out there, are already being implemented. Somebody's probably out there addressing one small segment that we don't even know about. There might be a nonprofit who's doing that. They're doing something pretty creative on a small scale in one neighborhood, and we don't even know about it yet. So I think identifying the existing programs and proposed solutions that are already out there is an important step to know what those gaps are that we need to fill. So I don't think that the challenge has changed that much since the study was done. I think it does a great job of outlining and what we need to address. I think our challenge now is figuring out how we're already addressing it in whatever limited capacity we are. To Paula's point, there are massive issues that we have to tackle. We have socioeconomic issues. We have multiple audiences we need to reach out to and talk to, multiple populations we need to talk to. At the state level, the apartment world, they're surveying market rate developers to ask them what kind of incentives would get you into doing affordable housing. What makes more? I thought free land or very limited price land would be at the top of the list. But from a developer standpoint, from an operator standpoint, it's not a bad thing, but it's not nearly as attractive as tax incentives, because the land part is a one-time savings. It's at the front of the deal. The tax incentives and the financial stuff is the lifetime of the deal. So it makes it much more financially viable to do an affordable deal with those incentives. But we wouldn't know that if we didn't reach out to them and ask them, because we, from the industry side, we're constantly being asked by groups, why aren't more developers interested in affordable housing? And it's not just because it's complicated. There are financial reasons too. So doing that kind of outreach to all of our different sectors and different audiences and different members of the community is going to be critical, because we just don't. I think we kind of know, we know what the challenge is, and we kind of know what some of the solutions might be, but we really don't know yet what some of those really viable solutions are going to be, or where we need to put our energy and our resources. So that's kind of where I was coming from with that clearinghouse. I mean, to me, the clearinghouse, the good thing about that is it's identifiable. We can say, by the end of this year, we want to have at least the outline of here's who's doing what that we know about, and put in place an outreach mechanism to get as much of that information as we can, so that we know where we are and we know how we need to move forward. Because I think that's one of our biggest challenges. We don't, unless I'm completely out of the loop, we don't really know exactly where we are and what we have.
You're not out of the loop.
Yeah, I like the clearinghouse idea. Marla, I have a question. Is there any money set aside for marketing and outreach?
Say that again. I was trying to say that Tom was trying to talk. Can you ask me that again?
I was just saying, asking if there was any money set aside for marketing and outreach.
So we have no budget at all. Yeah, I inquired about that a couple of weeks ago, to try to figure out how we can support moving some things forward. And there's no money allocated. So I would have to try to find just something in my general operating budget to fund anything, which kind of gets back to the point that Joe made about the role of philanthropy and some of our bank partners and whomever, there's no budget. So the boards and commissions are established, but they're not budgeted items, staff supports, and we have to fundraise or whatever to actually pay for activities that we may want to undertake.
That kind of segues into what I've been thinking. Sometimes you have a big elephant, as Paula said, and you're so focused on this big elephant that you're not hearing sometimes what everybody's saying. And I think if we all look at what we all said today, it comes pretty much back to, John used the word incentives, but incentives really can come down to dollars. And we can all have these great ideas and we can try to analyze all the parts of the elephant. But if we don't have money, we can't move forward. And I think if you look at those 5 areas, it's all great, but we got to have money, and we got to have 14,000 units, and we got to find a way to get this moving. So as John was saying, if we have a way to, number one, quickly assimilate everything that's out there, but then also start the process of getting the council focused on not maybe, but definitely we got to get a bond. I mean, I don't know any other way to solve this. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but that is money talks. And we're seeing it, Marla and I are seeing that with the work that we're doing, as we said at the very beginning, with one of our larger employers in town. So I would encourage us all to maybe just focus on that and how we can get that piece.
I agree with you, Tom. And Marla, how long does it take to get a bond referendum started? Because if it takes 4 years, for instance, we are already, how many years after that study that we needed 14,000 houses over the next 10 years? We need 14,000 houses now. And if we get a bond referendum 4 years from now, that need is going to be even greater. And so Marla, if you could see if you can help me with that, how long does it take to get a bond referendum? And in terms of this being a good role for philanthropy, how can we go about getting philanthropic dollars to the table in order to act now? So just some questions, lots of questions.
I think you're on mute, Marla.
So we did a bond referendum in 2014, and then there was one in 2018. I think Derwin can speak to this more authoritatively than I can. I think there's probably a minimum period of time between when you can do an initiative, but there is conversation about doing one in 22, which would be 4 years. So there were 4 years between the first 2 I mentioned. And so I'm assuming, because I don't know, that maybe 4 years is the threshold before you go back out, right? But I do understand that there is heightened interest in doing that. And there's a lot of steps that have to be taken, the legislative process for that, Derwin can tell us about it. But I think that there's a lot of talk about asking for a referendum next year. As far as philanthropy, I think the big thing with philanthropy is our ability to tell them what it is we want them to fund, and just making the case. And of course, also recognizing what the various funding interests are of the different foundations, right? So, and that's why I told Joe I appreciated, what he mentioned, because kind of leading the way with the Housing NOLA plan was a couple of foundations, but there was a vision that had to be cast, that they had to buy into, right? And so I think that this is a good kind of thing for philanthropy to get behind. We just have to tell them, give them a little bit of something about where we're trying to go, how we're trying to get there, and why we need their help and how we need their help. And that's why I really think, as I'm listening to you all more, that it might be kind of helpful for us to hear from Andronika Morris, to see how they actually teed that up and how they got the foundations and the banks and all of the other folks, to the table like they did. Yeah, I think it would be helpful for us to hear that, because that could get us started.
Yeah, I'd agree to that. And go ahead, Paul.
Well, I was going to say, we're talking about money here, and we're talking about the key to getting council on board with a bond issue, the key to getting philanthropists on board with helping all that. That keeps circling me back to saying we're not going to get anywhere with our asks for money until we have a plan. And so I hear you saying, Marla, that, hey, there ain't no money in the budget right now to do much of anything. So the short-term question is, where do we find the money to help put together the plan if the plan is the key to showing people what's needed and how we get the big bucks to actually help the project? So one question I've got is that if this new COVID stimulus bill passes Congress, there's supposed to be a bunch of money in there for state and local governments. And I suspect that some of that money is going to find its way to Winston-Salem. And I know the budget situation for the city is very tough this year, but I wonder if there's a way to kind of grab hold of some money that comes out of that, if that's coming fairly soon, to kind of help fund the putting together this plan. Because again, it seems to me the keys to getting the big bucks is being able to show people a plan for what is needed, how it's needed, where it's needed, things like that.
So I think with philanthropy and some of the other investors, so there was kind of like a seed investment to kind of get the work going to develop the actual plan. And then there were investments in the plan. So I think that, it kind of gets back to what I was saying in answering Paula's question about, I think there's a need for an initial vision. What is it we're trying to accomplish and all of those kinds of things. Those are the things that you put together that can help you get the seed money to get the process going. And then as part of the plan is how you identify what are the larger other myriad buckets of money that you need to be successful in implementation. So I think the seed money is probably what we need to look at first. That can help start the work of bringing the people together, getting the word out, and doing some of that preliminary stuff, maybe working on the clearinghouse of info and all of that, right? Because that's an undertaking in and of itself, right? And so, the question becomes, who does it? So we've got to have some help, right? So I think there is a need for a seed investment for this work to kind of get to some of the stuff then that would inform how we create that larger plan, recommend those policies to council and things of that nature.
I just want to jump in there just as I in terms of kind of centering us on some, because it is a big elephant, but I think we have more than I think we think we have at our disposal right now in terms of kind of information and data and stuff to help with this plan coming together. And I agree with you, Paul, in terms of how do you go ahead and get on the list on resources coming down? Because I wrote that one down too. Because from what I understand is potentially, if things pass for city as it is now, potentially $40 or $50 million that could come into this community, which being able to position to help support the work. But that's why I started us off in kind of the housing study itself, because again, there are some specifics there, and that maybe just being able to spend some time looking at those specific things within the plan. Because I go back to the first item, which is increase housing supply to close the current gap. The very first thing there is, okay, close the 16,244 unit housing supply gap. And the first one has a recommendation of a strategy number 1, increase affordable housing stock to meet the demand, and then give specific actions that can be taken to do that. So part of, in terms of we're talking about the plan, I think we have a decent framework for that plan already. The question is, what needs to stay here, what needs to come out, kind of thing, or what's missing, what's, you know, what's happened in terms of something that can actually be recommended as some formal component. But again, and that ties back into the conversation that I think has been woven through our entire dialogue today is, although we may make these recommendations, all that's going to have to live somewhere. And so I think that it keeps coming back to, again, you know, having that conversation with the folks from Housing NOLA, how they got started. But when we talk about the plan, we talk about the bond or resources to help facilitate getting there. I think we got a good framework for a lot of that, but then we also, again, we need to know who's working on these things already, who's out there. Where is this off now today on some of the specific actions in that area? But I do believe we have more, you know, kind of specifics on some potential actions, whether or not we're asking the question of, does this work for us in our community now? And then what needs to be bond funded or what needs to be different? Because even though you may say, you want to do a bond, well, how much housing are you really going to get out of a bond? You know, we look at the numbers of what has been done historically in the city for a bond referendum. Even if you say if it was just for housing, if you talk about $100 million, and that's, again, I'm just pulling a number out of the sky. You know, how much is that actually going to produce? Is there a requirement that money has to be leveraged against to multiply that? So I think there's a lot that goes in that. And then are you using general obligation bonds? Are you looking at limited obligation bonds? Are you looking at private activity bonds? There are a lot of that I think gets into the specifics of some of the actions. But if we come back and maybe spend a little time in the objectives and actions in the study, I think we may end up seeing we have a lot of the things that we've been talking about on the recommendations. And then that's necessary to go to the council and say, these are the things we're looking at, and to sell it to the community. Because if you're talking about a bond referendum, the community at the end of the day are going to be the folks who have to buy into the fact that we're okay investing our money in these specific categories or these specific things around housing, and not necessarily this general sense of, hey, we're just going to invest in affordable housing. So I don't think we'll hash it all out today, but I think it would be healthy for us to maybe take some time to maybe go back individually and just kind of look through that, and then maybe spend some time during our next meeting or so, or maybe even sending some thoughts back in between time around the recommendations, the specifics in there, those actions, so that we can have a better sense of kind of what's missing from the plan we have, and what do we feel like we need to add in that process.
Sounds like you just gave us homework, Derwin.
Yeah, Darren, I like that, analyzing that current housing study. When was that done? 2019? When was it done?
18.
2018, okay. And I think doing an analysis of where we are, you know, have we moved the needle in any of those objectives? You know, and the bond, if we do have a bond, will we have one focus? You know, like, will it just be preservation? Should it just be preservation? You know, so all of that. But I think the community would want to know before they vote on a bond is, what did we do in the 2018 bond? Did we accomplish all of the objectives there that we said we were going to do? I don't know. I'm sure there was a report on that. I just don't know about it. But I like the analysis, doing that analysis of the housing study.
So first of all, I love the fact we're having this open discussion, because I think there's been a need to kind of get us all focused. And to Paul's credit, he kind of pointed out in November that the housing study had some information. And I took his lead and went back through it, Derwin, like you've recommended we all do it. And there is a lot of information in there. There's information on future demand for units by income. So it kind of, and by size, because I know Paul was talking about, we need to know what types of units we're looking for. if you go back through that study, a lot of that is in there. And, you know, we can make another smaller, concise plan out of the information we already have. So I would, you know, endorse what Derwin said. I think if we all go back to that, that will get us focused on what we need. And then the philanthropy and the bond for funding is great, but that comes from this information tool that John's talking about, which, as someone else mentioned, hopefully the money will come from the government to get us some funds to get that going. So I think we're starting to come up with a great game plan, and now we just need to follow our chairman's recommendation and do our homework, because I think sometimes we have these meetings and then we just kind of wait for the next meeting. And so I think, you know, all of us need to kind of stay focused as much as we can with all the other things that we're doing, and help move this forward.
So if we look at action items then for what we need, I've heard a couple of things around the clearinghouse. We want, in terms of, you know, wanting to, you know, look at that work of understanding what's already happening out there, and being able to act in some form as a clearinghouse for that information around the work of affordable housing that's going on now. Taking an assessment of the existing housing study, and being able to come back, or even intermediately, to send some thoughts on some things associated with that. What else are some of the things that may be missing on just some of the what we want to kind of work towards? I know there was also, I know George, before I got to talk about the community engagement component of it, and Paula did mention that too. For me, I think that will come once we maybe synthesize some additional things from the study. If we came back with some stuff, if there was a place then to maybe shop and engage that with the public a little more, in terms of, I guess, you know, these are things that preparing to recommend or thinking the action on, that may be the space for the additional community engagement to take place at that time. Oh, and then also the conversation around the roundtables of the people who are doing the work. How do we begin to invite and convene conversation in those areas? Is that a good general sense of summary of kind of some of the goals that we want to work through?
I think so.
Repeat that last one for me. Make sure I understood.
So I wrote down roundtable and convening around how do we begin that process of pulling in folks who we've identified who's working in the spaces already, acting as a convener for conversations in those spaces.
Kind of makes me think back to some earlier conversations we've had about, on a larger scale, of course, you know, a summit, you know.
Yeah, I always think about the summit, Marla, when we're talking like this. But I was also thinking about, you know, we talked about who's going to do the work, you know, that we may need to think about, you know, and Marla, you've talked about it before, doing an RFP. Maybe there's a nonprofit or an organization who could help us, you know, in terms of doing some of the work, you know. I mean, we just got to think about, yeah, how are we going to get this work done? So,
yeah, at least I'll be honest, for me, my thought on it is to me, in my end, though, is that we end this, or it moves or transforms in some way into something that looks like that housing NOLA thing. I know when we first got that thought and that recommendations around it, when Marla brought that for me, that's in my mind, I think, you know, at least for me, how I'm thinking, like this then at some point transitions to something like that. And we're some form of conduit of facilitating potentially getting to that point. At least that's just, again, kind of a vantage point. Look, I'm looking at it from.
Yeah, and it is supported by a variety of funding sources. So, you know, it doesn't rest inside City Hall. I think the city provides some support, but they do have all of these other folks at the table that provide support. And Andronika can speak to a lot of that, but you'll see a lot of it too on the website. You know, which is why I thought it would just be helpful to kind of walk through it, because it's a treasure trove of documents and information that just kind of chronicles the journey. No pun intended, chronicle, but you know, but it really chronicles their journey through the whole process. And I think there was even I forget where it was on there. Like I said, the newspaper article that kind of has interviews of people that talked about, you know, why they were involved and why they thought this was important, you know, so that the community voice would be really out there. So I'll definitely, if you like, you know, I can ask her if she can come, if she can visit with us our next meeting.
I think it'd be great. You know, Derwin, as you were saying that, I mean, it occurred to me that if you boil this down to the simplest, what we're talking about is that thanks to the work done for the housing study and some of the work we've already done, we have a good handle on the what. What we're looking for is the how and the who is going to get it done. And I think that's where that housing NOLA framework really helps. And, you know, the how and the who, it does include the funding. And it does include who, you know, that's the how. You know, we need the funding for the how will help address that. And the who is, you know, it's the community. And I think the housing NOLA approach, to your point, is much more inclusive of the entire community, because you have philanthropy, you have the business community, you have the government, you have most importantly, you have the residents of the community all involved. And I think that's why I think it's so attractive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I can definitely reach out and see if I can get her scheduled for, I think our next meeting is the 26th of March, and see if she's available. Okay.
Speaking of next meetings, Marla and Derwin, Paula and I have continued to meet with Richard's group, and we thought it would be good to reach out to him and have him do a presentation to our group of some of the projects that he's aware of, because that takes me back to the, you know, show me the money thing, because that's kind of what he's saying. He's got some projects, but he just needs to sell the council or whoever on trying to come up with some funding. So I'll just throw that out and let you all determine when it would be good. But I made the effort to just say, would you be willing to do a presentation to the Affordable Housing Group? And he said, oh yes, definitely. So you all can determine when, but he's up for it.
And we do have a couple of things I need to share with you all under the kind of discussion section whenever you guys are ready, questions and comment stuff at the end.
Yeah, are we pretty good on the kind of follow up and the goals piece on those kind of 4 areas, and we can kind of understand where we want to get our next work from? If so, then pitch it to you, Marla.
Okay, so on March 16th at the Community Development, Housing and General Government Committee meeting with the council, agenda items include discussion on moving forward with the accessory dwelling units, as well as the cottage court housing typology. So, you know, if any of you are interested in that conversation, it'll be on the agenda for March 16th, and the committee meets at 4:30. and it'll probably still be virtual. Just wanted to make sure that you all knew that and could tune in if you wanted on the 16th of March.
And Marla, we tune in through the WS, the TV 13.
And there's also a way there, like if you go onto the city's website and when you get to the agendas page and all of that, it also gives instructions on how you can sign up to speak in a meeting as well. And I think they'll send you a special Zoom link or something that you can use if you think you may want to make any comments. Another thing is in working with the city attorney's office, I was reminded that we actually need to do officer elections again. I know we have a couple of members whose terms actually, well, 3 whose terms expire this month, but I know the mayor is working on, I think, bringing something to council next month so that some folks can get reappointed if they desire. But we also need to do officer elections. I suspect that may need to wait until the other folks are officially reappointed. But I just wanted to put that out there. And I was also informed that we actually needed to do a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. I think the first time out, you know, we had some reticence about, okay, I'll just be in the lead. So I know that's how we got to the 2 co-chairs, but I was advised that we needed to actually have a chair, vice chair, and then a secretary. So I suspect that if not for the March agenda, then certainly no later than the April agenda, we probably need to go ahead and formalize the new officers for this year. Let's see, I think those were the 2 biggest. Oh, one other thing I want to kind of circle back to, and it's the whole thing around OneDrive. Well, I know we started on it earlier before maybe everybody joined, but if you're still having challenges, please let Shavonda or me know, because again, we'd be more than happy to have someone from our information services department kind of talk with you and see if there's anything that might need to be added as some kind of patch, or what do you call it, an add-on to maybe your equipment, your computer, so that it works properly, or whatever the case may be. But just let us know, because I suspect that as this process gets moving, especially as we go down, maybe going towards creating a plan and some of the other things that we've talked about, there's probably going to be a lot of documents. And so we're going to need to make sure you have ready access to it, right? While we move forward. So please let me know. I'm going to sign up as an interested stakeholder. Okay, wait. I'm trying to read Sharon's chat. Housing Coalition website can be used to invite those interested to sign up as an interested stakeholder. 5 areas mentioned can be mentioned on the website, along with any additional items you'd like to ensure. I tell you, Sharon, she's on it today. She's a trove of information. So we actually have, okay, so thank you. But let me make sure I'm understanding. You're saying we create a website for that purpose, right, Sharon?
Yeah, if we don't, I think we should have, I think the Housing Coalition website can do a number of things that have already been discussed today. Mm-hmm. It's example, inviting stakeholders to actually, because someone mentioned earlier that we don't know what all the advocates and all of everybody is doing. So that website can be a place where any of us can direct people to go to the Housing Coalition website and sign up for one of those 5 areas that Mr. Montgomery mentioned, or any other housing issue or subject that they're tackling. And that's a way for us to, that's a way for you all to know what people are doing out in the community. Because right now, I think everybody agreed that it's not known what everybody is doing. So the website can be sort of that portal that gathers the information. And it's also a place where you can put surveys on the website, 2 or 3 question surveys to also get an indication of the pulse of what people are tackling out in the community, or what they're thinking about, or where their interests lie, or what their housing issues are. So any number of surveys can be utilized on the website. So I'm just suggesting that the Housing Coalition website can be used as one of the tools, in addition to any roundtable discussions or any other tools that the coalition uses to gather information.
Great, thank you. Great idea. Great idea.
Yep.
All right, that helps a lot. Having a place to store stuff.
You can do it without it costing anything.
Yeah, since we already have it.
Yeah.
I think those were the only items that I had. So again, if from a OneDrive perspective, though, in the meantime, if there are any issues, we'll be happy to have IS work with you directly. So just let us know. And like I said, I think those are the only things that I had.
And will you keep us updated on the timing on, particularly on just when we needed to calendar the officer stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I think that's everything we had noted on the agenda. Was there anything else we needed to bring before the group?
Does Joe have a new email or something? I haven't really been in touch with him directly, but I'd kind of like to catch up with him since he's been out of touch.
And what I can do is update the member roster and update his email address. He has a Gmail address.
Okay.
And I can get that out.
Cool.
Good meeting. I think we made a lot of progress.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, thanks, Derwin, for opening it up, so to speak. I mean, I think we've all had these ideas. We just have been kind of slow to feel like bringing them out. I think today you did a good job in just saying, hey, we got to get it. So we all started bringing up points, which is great.
Good. So it's had good work and more work to do. So.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, Paula. Okay. Well, are we at a point of adjournment?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll be sending more info to you in the coming days and weeks.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
See ya.